In today's video, we're going to take a look at the different ways you can get an element based on different information you might have about that element. So to start things off, we first have a simple HTML page here, right? So there are two lists basically. One of them is about some food, and well, both of them are prefixed by a paragraph, by a p element. And this guy just has simple list items. And this guy has also radio buttons so that you can select them, and they have a name and they have a value. Okay, that's basically all there is to this. Now, if we take a look at the page itself, it's very straightforward. If we go to the elements, we're going to see the same HTML here. So that's very nice. If you take a look here, the first P has the ID P1. What if I want to get that element, that paragraph, inside the JavaScript, right? Knowing that the ID is going to be P1. What we have to do is simply say document.getElementById. This is a function that gets you one element, and just type in the ID in quotes, basically a string as the ID. So if I say that, and let's store it somewhere, for example, let's say let P1 equals that. If I hit enter and type in P1, you'll notice that it automatically shows us that this is the element, right? And it highlights it nicely on the screen. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually change this element inside the JavaScript. So we could say, for example, p1 dot, let's say inner HTML equals test. And when I hit enter, you'll notice that the paragraph here actually changed. Okay. So now if I refresh, of course, the changes are gone and the HTML is reloaded. So this is how you can do processing at the level of nodes. Now, this is the first way you can get the elements, by ID, okay? Next up, we have get elements. So again, document.getElements this time. So it's multiple elements by class name. Okay, and here I have each of the lists here. Right, the UL elements have a class called simple list. So what I can do is to select them, just call this function with the simple list parameter here. And you'll notice when I hit enter, I get an HTML collection. It's basically just a list of two elements. And if I go here and hover over them, we can see visually which element is that. Okay, but what if you, for example, don't have a class for the elements, and somehow the only way to get the element is by using its tags? So for example, what if I wanted to get all the LE or list items from here, right? All these three and all these three together. How would you go about it? Well, there is another function, document.getElementsByTagName. And this tag name is quite literally the HTML tag that it's using. So we can say here getElementByTagName LE, and if I hit enter, you'll notice I get 6 of them. And if I start hovering over them, we can see that we are in fact selecting all of them here. So we can get elements by ID, by class name, by tag name, and there's just one more thing that we can get them by, and that is by name. What's that supposed to be? Well, the tag name is quite literally the name of the tag inside HTML. The name is not UL, not LI, not P, not body, none of those. It's actually the name attribute. So in here, where I actually added the radio buttons, you can see that I've given them some names, and this is what they're going to be selecting for. As you can see, name equals hobby. All three of them have this. So if I were to say here, well, document.getElementsByName instead of tag name this time, and say here hobby, you'll notice that I'll get 3 inputs. And those inputs are, well, these 3 radio buttons, right? If I were to change one, for example, to not be hobby, let's say hobby 2, well, if I clear the console and run this again, you'll notice I'm only getting the two here. So we're gonna get the first one and the second one, and the third one has a different name. Okay, so this is what this get elements by name can be used for. It's not often that you need to use such a thing, but sometimes you might find that more useful than any other ones. Now there are two more functions that sort of do the same thing and more than what we have seen so far. So if you take a look at the document.querySelector function, this guy takes in, instead of an ID, a tag name or a name, it takes in a CSS selector. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with them, and well, you can use them inside this function. Just send them as strings here. So you can say, let's say we want to select all the elements with the class simple list, which we can find here. Well, what we have to do is just say dot for class and simple list. And then we're gonna get, well, only the first element with that class. Okay, so this query selector function only returns one element, and that is the first element that you find in HTML. Okay, to get all of them, you simply have to call a different function called querySelectorAll, and this is going to return to you a list of elements here, as you can see. So I get ul.simpleList and another one, and if I hover over them, they are the two lists that we wanted to select. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Now this querySelector and querySelectorAll functions are pretty useful when it comes to selecting sort of elements in a very complex manner. So for example, suppose I want to select something inside this list, and I want to select just the first list item from each of the lists, right? How would I go about it? Well, we can just use the querySelectorAll function and give it a proper CSS selector. So we can say here document.querySelectorAll, and what we want is really simple list, right? So we want the simple lists, but we want only the first element or the first child or LE item inside that list. So we can say space LE, and that LE, which is the first child. So we can say that colon first child. And as you'll notice, I'm going to get as a result two LE items, the first one being the top, from the top list, and the second one being from the bottom list. Okay, so this is how you can select elements in a more complex manner. And of course you can use any CSS selector in here, so as long as you know what you're doing, you're gonna get the proper result. And really, this is one distinction between querySelectorAll and querySelector, because if I were to just use querySelector, I would just get, well, the first element, which is fine in some situations, but just be careful that you know the difference between those two. So only querySelector and getElement by ID is going to return just one element. The rest are going to return a list of elements, even if you only get one element inside that list. Okay, so keep this in mind. So one more thing, suppose I get, well, the first list in our HTML. So if I go document dot, let's say get, or let's use querySelector. So we can use querySelector of dot simple list. So this is gonna get us only the first list of our HTML. And then from it, suppose I want to get the last list item. How would I go about it? Well, to do it, if I have just this UL inside here stored as a variable, what I can do is just say ul.querySelector and then type in LE as the CSS selector here, or LE first child. I guess it's better this way. And that's gonna give us the first element of that list while also having the list saved somewhere. Okay, and of course you can also use all the, or most of the other functions that we have looked at so far with HTML elements inside JavaScript. So you can use, let's see here, we can use ul.get element by class name, by tag name, and well, there's no by ID nor by name for whatever reason, and query selector and query selector all both exist here as well, as you will notice. Okay, so you can actually chain them together, but I do suggest that you actually just use a more complex query selector if you want to select elements inside elements inside elements inside elements. One last note here: if you're using a framework like Angular, React, or any of the ones out there, please do not use these functions, because the framework itself should manage the HTML elements, and you should just change the JavaScript code so that it updates the templates properly. Okay, don't try to select the elements manually and start modifying them, because it might get into conflict with the way the frameworks are updating the DOM. That's it for today. I hope you understood what's going on here. I think it's very simple. I just wanted to list all the ways you can get the elements from the document. And if you do have any questions, do leave them down in the comments below or on our Discord channel. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.